Today we are going to talk clear gel. So I've got a bunch of different gels. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to work with these gels. So let's just start with all of our different clear gels that we have. Now I've got our base, flex, build, and clear sculptor. Now I have thrown in build pink. I'll get to that in just a second. Those are our four main clear gels. We also have the clear sculptor in the tube. And again, I threw in the build pink. Let's talk consistency. Base is our thinnest gel. This one has a little bit of glitter in it because we've used it, so disregard that, but base is gonna be our thinnest gel. This is always gonna be our first gel that we use no matter what, okay? The next one is gonna be our flex gel. So if I hold our base and our flex next to each other and I tilt those on the side, base is going to start to move a little bit faster than the flex. So that's going to show you that the base is thinner than the flex. Okay. Our next one is going to be the build. And I'm going to show you that same technique. So the build is going to move again a little bit slower than the base. So see how much quicker the base is going to move? That build is still kind of moving a little bit, but it's not running as fast. Okay. Now, if we hold that build and the flex together, you're going to see that, again, the flex is going to move faster than the build. Okay, so if you have, you have these pots at home and you're confused, or maybe you put the wrong cap on it and you don't have the label on the bottom, you can tilt those on the side and you can see whatever's moving faster. And that's going to help to kind of guide you as to what's thicker and what's thinner. Now, in the pot, we have Clear Sculptor. Now, Clear Sculptor in the pot is a completely non-leveling gel. All of the rest of these gels I've been showing you, those are self-leveling, which basically means that they run and they flow. The Clear Sculptor in the pot is completely non-leveling. It's not going to move. You can see where we've used this in the past. It doesn't level back down. I could actually sit here and I could hold this container upside down all day long and it's not going to move. It's not going to flow out of the pot because it's not going to self-level at all. So I did throw in the build pink because this is still a clear gel, but it just has a light pink tint to it. It's the exact same as your build, but it just has that pink tint to it. So I kind of consider it a clear gel. Again, it is clear, you can see through it, but it does have just that light pink tint to it. Okay, so those are the gels in the pot. Now we do have a couple of our clear gels in the Precision Applicator tubes. We have our Clear Sculptor and we have the Build Pink. Now the Build Pink in the tube is the same as the Build Pink in the pot. Totally the same. The Clear Sculptor is very different from what's in the pot. If I squeeze this out onto a tile, you can see that that's much thinner than the Clear Sculptor in the pot. If I tilt this on the side, you're going to start to see that Clear Sculptor kind of just level a little bit. It's going to flow with gravity a little bit. Again, in the pot, it's not going to move at all. Okay? It's a slightly different viscosity, slightly different thickness to it in the tube versus the pot. Okay? It's still going to give you the same structure. Once these are cured, all of these gels are going to give you the same hardness, the same durability. So it's really just the difference being the consistency to it. One other thing I want to talk about with consistency is temperature. Now, same thing with acrylic, temperature affects product. With gels, the colder your environment is, the slower your products are going to move. The cold is going to it's not going to solidify them, but it's going to make them feel a little bit thicker. So if you're in a cold environment, your products are going to move and they're going to flow a lot slower. Now, if you're in a warmer environment, those products are going to move. They're going to flow. It's going to thin them out even more. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. The ideal temperature to work with a gel or acrylic or really any other nail products is between about 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so if you're working colder than that, again, your products are going to feel a little thicker. They're not going to self-level as fast. If you're working in a warmer environment, they're going to feel thinner and they're going to flow a little bit more. Okay, now here's the thing you guys have to remember. Please do not try to heat up your products to make them flow and make them move faster. These are chemicals. We don't want to be exposing these to heat. We don't want to be putting them on a little, I know I've seen people try to use coffee mug warmers or put them in hot water, things like that. You don't want to try to warm them up using anything that's going to actually heat them, okay? Keep that in mind when you're working with your products. So now you guys know the viscosity, you know the thickness of them. How do we pick up each gel? Because each gel is going to be just slightly different in how we move it and how we pick it up. When we work with the base gel again being the thinnest gel, we're going to just take our brush and basically kind of glide that brush right over the surface, pick up and tap off that little bit of extra strength. Okay? When you're working with your base gel, you don't need a lot of that gel. This is really going to go onto the nail in a thin layer. Okay, so all that I've got on my brush right now, that's all you're really going to need to apply. You're just going to brush that onto the nail. Okay, so base being nice and thin, you really don't have to worry about it running and flowing on the nail because you're not putting a lot on. Okay? Again, just dragging that brush through, lift up, tap off that extra. Okay, now as our gels get thicker, you're going to need to use a little bit more pressure and a little bit more kind of a scooping action, okay? With our flex is still a little bit on the thinner side, so you can kind of do that same gliding over the surface, but with the flex, I do tend to go in a little bit deeper in and then pick up, and I actually will turn my brush over so that I have my product on the top. Now again, you guys can see it's still kind of flowing. It still is fairly thin, so you're not going to be able to pick up a ton of this where you'd be able to sculpt out maybe an overlay or something like this, okay? So you're going to only be able to pick up small amounts of the flex at a time. Now as we get a little bit thicker, as you press into that product, you're going to feel a little bit more resistance as you put your brush in there. And you can kind of see that I'm bringing that in there. Same thing, kind of give it a little bit of a scoop. Turn your brush over and tap off, but you can see now I can actually pick up a little bit more of that product on my brush than I was able to pick up of the flex. But again, kind of scooping down in there. Now, when we get to our Clear Sculptor in the pot, this is the completely different one. This one, you're not going to be able to just drag across the top and pick up a good amount. With this one, you're actually going to need to dig down in, kind of scoop down in, get under the product, and lift up, okay? Then again, you can tap off that little bit of extra. But now you can see how much product you can actually pick up just by that scooping action versus dragging across the top. Now, when we're working with the tubes, slightly different technique because you're not actually picking it up with a brush. I recommend giving it a little bit of a squeeze, work with what you've got, and then if you need more, you can squeeze a little bit more. Okay. A lot of times people tend to try to squeeze out a whole lot of it onto the nail, and then they get working with it, and then it starts to move and flow, and it may get out of control. So I recommend little bits at a time. That way it's not going to get out of control for you. So the Build Pink is going to, again, just be like the Build Clear. Same thing, you're just going to draw your brush through that, kind of scoop up, and you'll be able to pick up a little bit of a thicker amount of product. Now, with the Build Pink in the tubes, that is the same consistency as it's in the pot, so you don't have to worry about it being any different. But let's compare the Build Pink to the Clear Sculptor in the tubes, just so you can see a little bit of the difference. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, kind of like I did here to show you how it flows. You can already see that the Build Pink is starting to come out of the tube. It's starting to flow out. I'm not putting any pressure on that at all. So it is going to flow a little bit more, a little bit faster. So I'm going to put a little bit of each of those products on there. And then let's go with gravity. So if we tilt that on the side, again, you're going to start to see both of them are moving, but that Build Pink is going to flow just a little bit faster. So again, the Clear Sculptor in the tube is thinner than in the pot, but it's still not quite as thin as the Build or Build Pink, okay? So just for kind of a reference as to what's gonna move and flow faster. I wanna show you guys how you're gonna be working with your clear gels. I already showed you how you're gonna be brushing on your base gel. You're just gonna glide through, pick up that little bit. You're gonna put pressure into your brush, okay? You want to be using a good amount of pressure. You don't want to just softly press that through. Do you see how if I'm just kind of gliding over the surface of it, I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure? That's what we don't want to do. We actually want to put some pressure with our brush. See how now my brush is kind of pressing down, it's kind of fanning out a little bit? What that's going to do is it's going to get that base gel down into all of the little nooks and crannies of that nail. So a little bit of pressure all the way through and a nice thin layer, a nice thin application, okay? With the base, this is not the time to be building up structure. All we're trying to do with the base is create a foundation layer, okay? Base is what has the most resins to it, which means it's designed to bond the best to that natural nail, okay? The rest of the gels don't have as much of that resin to it, so those aren't going to have the best bond, okay? You have to start with your base gel to get that best adhesion. Okay, so again, with our base gel, all we're doing is brushing that product on, okay? Now, if we get into the thicker gels, say our Flex, with that, we're not going to be able to pick up a whole lot of that product, but what we have on there is what we're going to do is do more of a floating technique. So keeping my brush kind of connected to it, do you see how I gave it just a little bit of a bounce and then lift up? And I'm just kind of floating on the surface of this product, okay? I can do kind of circular motions. I can do a back and forth. I can kind of glide that over to the side, but I'm not brushing. I'm not putting pressure onto this one, okay? This one, we want to keep the thickness to our product. This is what we're going to be using to build up a little bit more of that nail, okay? But I want you guys to notice as I'm working, do you see how thin that product is? That product, that Flex gel, that's going to kind of self-level a little bit faster and it's going to move a little bit more, okay? So with this one, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using this one for building up structure, okay? And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But this one, again, you're going to be doing more floating over the surface of it rather than brushing. Same thing with our build gel. Build, again, you're going to scoop in, lift up, tap that string off, and you're going to set that down onto the nail, kind of bounce just a little bit to let that let go. And again, you're going to be doing kind of those circular motions back and forth, but floating. You're staying on the surface of the product. Again, you're not brushing into that product at all. You're staying on the surface and floating. Now we get to our thickest gel. To pick this one up and to move this one, again, you're going to scoop into that container, lift up, turn over. Now, this one is where people tend to have a little bit more of a hard time releasing the product from their brush because it is so thick. So make sure that you're pressing that product down, give it a good press, lift up your brush, and again, you see how it kind of lets go? I don't want to do any bouncing like this. And a lot of times when people are working with the Clear Sculptor, that's what they do, okay? And they're bouncing and they're moving that product and trying to get it to release from their brush. And what's happening is as I'm bouncing, let me smooth this out so you can see. When I was bouncing my brush, I was getting little air bubbles in there, okay? That's what we don't want to happen. And again, bouncing is what's going to put those air bubbles in. So especially when you're working with that Clear Sculptor, you want to make sure that you're keeping your brush floating on the surface of that nail. So again, we're going to scoop in, pick up our pearl, set it down with some pressure, lift up, and then float. Okay, making sure that you're keeping that contact. Now, I am seeing still a couple of little air bubbles in there. It's going to happen from time to time. Okay. What you want to make sure that you do is if you do see those air bubbles, just kind of circle your brush over them or just kind of pull that air bubble away, okay? You want to make sure that you're releasing those air bubbles before you do cure your product. Otherwise, you're going to have air bubbles in there, and if you're trying to do a design that's clear all the way through, you're going to be seeing those air bubbles. Now, if you have air bubbles and you file into them, basically what happens is, so if you have this little air bubble and you file off the top of it, now we have a little crater in the nail, okay? And that can collect dust or dirt or things that you don't want in there. It can also affect the look of your gel polish. So make sure that if you do have those little air bubbles in there, make sure to either kind of poke into them or pull that product a little bit and release that air bubble. Okay. Now, it's not as common with the thinner gels, but it is a little bit more common with the thicker gels. Okay. So just make sure that you're not bouncing that brush and that you do release those air bubbles as you're working. Okay, I'm going to show you guys one more technique with this with the Clear Sculptor in the pot, and this is how I like to use it when I'm putting it onto a form. So I'll still come in and I'll scoop up that product. Now, on the nail, I did show you how to press it down and just put a little bit of pressure onto it. A lot of times when I'm working with it on my form, you can see how I've got product on one side and not the other. So I've got product on the top side, no product on the bottom side. What I like to do is I'll take the brush that has no product on it, so the side of the brush that has no product on it, I'll touch that onto my form, and then I'll just roll my product off the brush onto the form. And then I can use kind of the point of the brush to glide over the surface of it, float over the surface of it, and use that to move my product. Okay, just another technique on how to get that product off your brush. And I feel like this is a good technique, especially for beginners. So if you're still kind of struggling picking up your product and you want to work with that Clear Sculptor in the pot, roll it off your brush. It's going to be a little bit easier for you than trying to bounce or trying to release it from your brush that way. Just another little trick that works really good for me. Okay, let me show you now how to use the Build Pink in the tube. Okay. This one, just like I was showing you on the tile, this one you're going to squeeze out a little bit of that product. Now I want you guys to notice how that product is flowing. So if I squeeze product out onto the nail and I hold that nail flat, you're going to start to see that product is going to flow all the way down to the sides. It's going to flow into the cuticle area. Okay. It is a little bit of a self-leveling gel, so you want to make sure you're not getting that product into that cuticle area or into those sides. So to work with this, you want to be squeezing that product out or applying it towards that cuticle. But do you see the angle of the nail? I'm working with that nail angle downward, so now my product is going to flow down the length of the nail. Okay. If you're working with the tubes, you can still use that floating technique, but instead of using the brush, you're just going to be using the nozzle. Okay. So staying on the surface of that product, just kind of floating over the surface and dragging that product. Okay, so just moving it all the way wherever you want it. Okay, now you guys, I'm not finishing up these nails. I'm not making them perfect. I'm just showing you those motions and that technique. Okay, so don't worry. I'm not going to do a nail just like this. If you guys need to see a full nail done, we've got a ton of other videos for you on that. Now, let's talk about the Clear Sculptor in the tube. Okay, because I was showing you the Clear Sculptor in the pot. Clear Sculptor in the tube is similar to the Build Pink in the tube, but it is just a little bit thicker. Okay, so again, if I squeeze that out, I'm still going to use the nozzle to move that around, but it's not going to self-level quite as much. Okay, so you'll start to see, even if I squeeze out a little bit more on there, a little bit more, work that product around, it's not going to flow quite as fast. Even if I don't have it straight down, even if I have it on the sides, it's not going to flow quite as fast down into those sidewalls. So it is a thicker gel, so you've got a little bit more time to work with it. Okay, so just some differences in how you're going to apply your gels, whether it's from the pot or the tube. So you guys, I know you probably have the question, why do we have all of these different ones? Okay. I'm going to break this down now so that you guys know which clear gel to use for what purpose, or some suggestions as to what to use for each purpose. Okay, now base gel. Let's always start with base gel. Base is always going to be your foundation gel. Okay, you never want to skip this step. It's going to have the best bond. It's going to have the best adhesion to the nail. Okay, again, it is the thinnest gel, so you can use this one if you are doing dimensional nails as well. So if you're doing a layer on top of layer on top of layer, you can use the base gel. So a lot of times what I'll do is if I'm doing a dimensional nail, again, first start with your first coat of base. We're going to assume that there's a coat of base on here. you can put your coat of base on there, brush that on nice and thin. Again, I'm not trying to build up structure, but then you can add your glitters directly into that layer of base. So if you want to add in a little bit of glitter to your design, you can just set that down into your layer of wet base gel. Cure this, and then you can do maybe a second layer of glitter or another color of glitter. But again, because the base is so thin, you're going to be able to layer one layer on top of the other without building up too much bulk or too much thickness. Okay, so base is always what you're going to use to start sculpting. It's the foundation layer. It's the first layer that you're always going to use. But again, you can use it for layering in thin layers to get your dimensional nails and the designs. Let's talk about flex. Now, flex, being as thin as it is, I don't necessarily recommend using this one for sculpting out the nails or building up structure. It's pretty thin and it's very self-leveling, so you're not going to get the best control of it. What I like to use my flex for is for glitter mixing. So if you're wanting to do the dimension and layering, use the base. If you're wanting to mix your glitter into your gel, you can use the flex. Now, the reason that I like to use flex for when I'm mixing my glitters is because it is so thin. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of that flex. When I add my glitter to my gel, it's going to create a thicker consistency. So if I started out with one of the thicker gels and tried to add glitter to that, it's going to be probably way too thick. But if I start with the flex gel and I mix my glitter into that, it's going to feel a little bit thicker, but it's not going to be unmanageable. It's still going to be able to kind of flow a little bit. You can see once I've got that glitter mixed in there, you can still see it's going to soften just a little bit. Okay, so let me bring that all together. It's just going to start to soften. It's not going to run a whole lot, but it's just going to soften. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that I love to use the flex for glitter mixing. You're still going to have a good consistency to it. It's not going to be over thick or over thin. Okay. Now, build and build pink. Those two are my favorites for if I'm doing a dimensional design. If I've done layer on top of layer on top of layer, I still need to encapsulate. I still need to cap those nails and cap that design so that I don't file that off. That's where I like to use the build and the build pink. Okay, that's going to be enough of a thicker consistency where it's going to set down onto the nail, but it's not going to be so thick that you're going to be building up extra bulk. Okay, so those are great for encapsulation. Now, the Clear Sculptor, both the Clear Sculptor in the pot and in the tube are what I usually like to use for creating my extension. Okay, and kind of like I showed you earlier with the Clear Sculptor in the pot, this is what we can use to build out our extensions. Okay, so again, when I'm building out my extensions, I like the thickness of the Clear Sculptor. Let me show you what happens if you use something that's too thin on the free edge. Okay, so if you're trying to build out your free edge and say you grabbed your flex and you scoop up a little bit of that and you get that onto your form and you're moving your product, my flex is already starting to kind of flow down the sides. It's going to start to self-level and it's going to move. Okay, so I'm going to have a harder time controlling my product and keeping that perfect. So again, if I'm trying to clean up my edges and make my edges perfect, that product is going to start to flow down that form. It's going to flow with gravity, so it's not going to be as easy to use as a thicker gel would. Okay, so if I'm going to use the Clear Sculptor, usually I like to use the Clear Sculptor in the tube. So this way I can squeeze out that product onto my form and I can maneuver that product and I can kind of float that product down the length of the form, and it's not really going to flow very much. It's going to pretty much kind of stay where I put it. And again, then I can come in and I can clean up my edges and it's not going to start to run down that form. Okay, so using the Clear Sculptor to build out your extensions is going to make your life much easier. Okay, and again, you have the choice if you want the Clear Sculptor from the tube, or if you still feel like you need something a little bit thicker, you can use from the pot. So you guys, I'm going to cure this extension really quick just to kind of freeze it into place so that you can see how I would build up that build up the structure of the nail. So again, this is going to go into the light. I'm just going to freeze this for a quick 30 seconds. All right, so my extension is built out. I'm going to assume that I have base on that natural nail as well. I can take that form off, and then this is where I like to use my Clear Sculptor in the tube to build up structure. So this being a thicker gel, I can use this up over that natural nail. I can use it down over the free edge, but I can use this to really build up the structure of the nail without it running or flowing or moving too quickly for me. Again, I still want to keep in mind kind of the letting gravity work with me. So do you see how I am keeping that nail angled downward a little bit? This product is going to flow a little bit, but not as much as some of the thinner gels would. Okay, so you can build up your structure using that Clear Sculptor in the tube. Okay, you can still come back and use your brush if you need to, kind of touch your product up, get it a little closer to the edges and things like that. So you don't have to just use the tube, you can use the brush to apply it as well. But then we would get this into the light as well. Okay, so hopefully this will kind of clear up some of your questions that you may have with our clear gels. Now you know what clear gels we have, what to use them for, the thickness, the thinness, how to work with them in different temperatures. So hopefully this is going to make your gel applications much easier.